The massive alien flagship emerged from the void of space like a dark moon, its metallic hull reflecting the distant starlight. It was enormous, easily the size of a small moon, covered in glowing red and blue lights that pulsed menacingly. The ship's dark exterior seemed to swallow the light around it, giving it a terrifying, otherworldly presence. Earth's orbital defense platforms immediately powered up, targeting the alien vessel, but no one dared to fire. The tension in the high command war room was suffocating as officers stared at the holographic display of the intruder. Admiral Hayes stood at the center of the war room, her hands clasped behind her back, jaw clenched tight. She was tall, with sharp gray eyes that missed nothing. Her uniform was crisp, adorned with medals that marked her years of service and countless victories. She didn't speak as the alien ship began to transmit a signal. A dark, distorted voice echoed through the room as a hologram materialized in front of them. A towering figure in crimson armor with an elongated face and cold, golden eyes. "I am Supreme Commander Vekren of the Galactic Council," the figure said, his voice deep and vibrating unnaturally. "Terran Empire, you have violated Council laws by expanding into restricted territories. Your defiance will not be tolerated any longer." His golden eyes narrowed. "You have 1 hour to surrender. Dismantle your fleet. Lay down your weapons, or be erased from existence." A murmur spread through the room. Admiral Hayes remained stone-faced. Her officers turned toward her, waiting for a response. A junior officer, his face pale, whispered, "They've brought a war fleet. Over 200 ships." Admiral Hayes's eyes narrowed. "They came prepared," she said coldly. Vikran's gaze sharpened. "Do not mistake this as a negotiation, Admiral. Humanity's place is beneath the Council. The fact that you've survived this long is a mercy. That mercy ends today." Hayes's fists tightened. "And if we refuse?" Vekran's mouth twisted into a sharp, cruel smile. "Then Earth will burn. Your people will become nothing more than a forgotten stain on the galactic map." The transmission cut off. The hologram flickered and vanished, leaving only the sound of strained breathing and the low hum of machinery in the room. Hayes's eyes swept across her officers. Some looked fearful, others furious. Hayes walked toward the large display, showing the galactic fleet moving into position. Cruisers, dreadnoughts, and battleships formed a tight blockade around Earth's orbit. It was overwhelming. Technology centuries ahead of Terran capabilities. "Status report," Hayes said, her voice steady. "Enemy ships are holding position," Commander Reynolds said from the tactical station. He was a tall man with sharp features and dark hair cropped close to his scalp. "But they're deploying fighters. They're setting up a planetary siege." Hayes studied the display. "Weapons? Our railguns won't pierce their shields," Reynolds replied. "Missiles won't make it through their point defense systems." "Then we'll have to get creative," Hayes said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were sharp and calculating. "How long until our stealth fleet is in position?" 30 minutes. "Good." Hayes's gaze hardened. "They want us to surrender. They think we're weak." She glanced at the officers. "We are not weak." "But Admiral," one officer said nervously, "their technology. Technology doesn't win wars. Strategy does." Hayes's voice cut through the doubt like a blade. "They've underestimated us. That's their first mistake, and we're going to make them regret it." Reynolds smirked. "What's the plan?" "We hit them where it hurts." Hayes stepped toward the display. "They've clustered their flagship at the center of their fleet. That's a strategic weak point. If we can infiltrate and disable their command ship, we disrupt the entire formation." "That's suicide," one officer said. "Their flagship will be guarded." "Good," Hayes said. "Let them guard it." She turned toward Reynolds. "Prepare the infiltration team." Reynolds nodded. "Understood." "Admiral." Another officer's voice cut through the tension. "We're receiving another transmission." Hayes's eyes darkened. "Put it through." Vekran's face reappeared. "Have you reconsidered?" Hayes stepped forward. "Humanity doesn't kneel." Vecran's face twisted with cold fury. Then you've chosen extinction. The transmission cut off again. Moments later, the tactical display lit up with red warnings as the galactic fleet began to advance. Battleships moved into a tight formation, and swarms of fighters deployed like black clouds toward Earth. Enemy fleet is locking weapons, Reynolds shouted. Shields to maximum, Hayes barked. Deploy the first defense line. In orbit, Earth's defense platforms rotated into position, missile bays sliding open. Plasma cannons began to charge. Admiral, a technician called out. Orbital platform Delta is reporting malfunctions. Sabotage, Hayes asked. Unconfirmed, but it's offline. Hayes's jaw tightened. Enemy ships closing in fast. Hayes turned toward Reynolds. Send the signal. All stealth ships, engage. Aye, Admiral. In the depths of space, the Terran stealth fleet began to move. Sleek, black hulls slid through the darkness, their cloaking systems rendering them invisible to enemy sensors. The lead ship, Valkyrie, moved with predatory grace, its weapons systems humming softly. Hayes watched as the first Terran missiles launched. They sped toward the enemy fleet, but were intercepted by bright bursts of plasma fire. Explosions flashed across the dark sky. Earth's defenses returned fire, but the enemy ships barely flinched. Minimal damage, Reynolds reported. Hayes's eyes sharpened. They're testing us. Enemy flagship is charging main cannon. Time to impact. 45 seconds. Hayes's hand hovered over the command panel. Her heart was steady. Hold fire. Admiral. Trust me, Hayes said. The enemy flagship's cannon began to glow bright red. The charge intensified, and the surrounding ships pulled back, preparing for the massive energy release. 20 seconds. Admiral. Hold, Hayes said quietly. The cannon reached full charge. 10 seconds. Admiral. Fire, Hayes shouted. Terran railguns and missile launchers fired simultaneously. The stealth fleet uncloaked and launched EMP torpedoes directly at the flagship's energy core. A blinding explosion erupted across the display. The enemy flagship's shields rippled and flickered. The massive energy cannon detonated prematurely, sending a shockwave through the surrounding fleet. Smaller ships were thrown off course. Direct hit, Reynolds shouted. The enemy flagship began to drift. Smoke and fire spilled from its hull. Panic spread through the enemy ranks as the central command ship lost control. Hayes smiled coldly. They wanted to see humanity's strength. They just got their answer. The tactical display flickered as the enemy fleet began to regroup. More ships advanced toward Earth's orbit. Reynolds turned toward Hayes. They're coming for us. Hayes's smile faded. Let them. The cold emptiness of space trembled as the galactic fleet began to move. Rows of alien battleships shifted into attack formation, their dark metallic hulls reflecting the faint light of distant stars. From the bridge of the Terran flagship Valkyrie, Admiral Hayes watched the tactical display with sharp, calculating eyes. The enemy ships moved with frightening precision, each one falling into perfect alignment as they surrounded Earth's orbital defenses. The Galactic Council wasn't just prepared for war. They were hunting. Enemy ships advancing. Commander Reynolds reported, his voice tight. He stood at the tactical station, eyes flicking across the glowing red indicators on the screen. They've deployed fighter squadrons. They'll be in firing range in 2 minutes. Hayes's expression didn't change. Her eyes tracked the enemy ships as they swarmed toward Earth, thousands of fighters spreading out like a dark cloud. The Council's strategy was clear. They intended to overwhelm Earth's defenses through sheer force. It was an old tactic, but effective when you had superior numbers and firepower. Unfortunately for them, Hayes didn't play by the rules. Have the stealth fleet reached position? Hayes asked calmly. Almost there, Reynolds replied. He hesitated. But if we engage too early, they'll adapt. Hayes finished for him. I know. Her gaze sharpened. We're not going to engage them head-on. "We're going to cut off the head of the snake." A sudden alarm blared through the ship. Red warning lights flared across the bridge. A junior officer's voice trembled as he called out, "Enemy dreadnoughts locking onto our orbital platforms." "Shields to maximum," Hayes ordered. A heartbeat later, the first wave of plasma fire erupted from the enemy fleet. Massive beams of blue energy sliced through the darkness of space and smashed into Earth's orbital platforms. Explosions bloomed in slow motion, sending debris and molten metal spiraling into the void. One of the defense platforms buckled under the assault, tearing apart in a violent chain reaction. "Orbital platform Delta is gone," Reynolds shouted. The bridge shuddered violently as enemy fire struck the Valkyrie shields. The energy barrier rippled and sparked, struggling to hold. Shield strength down to 60%. Hayes's knuckles whitened against the edge of the control panel. "Hold position." "They're targeting the orbital defense grid," Reynolds said. His voice was tense. "If they take out the platforms, Earth will be defenseless." "They won't get that far," Hayes said. Her gaze darkened as the enemy fleet continued to fire. "Open a channel to the stealth fleet." The holographic display flickered as the face of Captain Rourke, leader of the Terran stealth fleet, appeared. He was a rugged man with dark eyes and a scar running down his jaw. "We're in position, Admiral," Rourke said. "Just give the order." Hayes's eyes narrowed. "Take out their sensor relays first, then target their command ships." Rourke's lips curled into a grin. "Understood." The transmission cut off. A moment later, the stealth fleet decloaked. Sleek black ships slipped through the dark like shadows, their hulls absorbing light. They moved silently, undetected, right into the heart of the enemy formation. "Stealth ships in attack position," Reynolds reported. Hayes's eyes gleamed. "Fire." Torpedoes streaked from the stealth ships, trailing white-blue light as they cut through the darkness. The first volley struck the enemy's sensor arrays, creating brilliant explosions that sent fragments of alien metal spinning into the void. Several enemy ships jolted and began to drift, their targeting systems suddenly blind. "Direct hit," Reynolds shouted. The stealth fleet pressed forward, plasma cannons igniting in rapid bursts of white and blue fire. The enemy flagship's shields flickered under the assault. One of the enemy destroyers lost power and spun out of control, crashing into a neighboring ship. The impact erupted in a chain reaction of violent explosions. "Enemy fleet is scrambling," Reynolds said. On the display, alien ships began shifting positions, trying to cover their weak spots. But the damage was done. Their tight formation was broken. Hayes smiled grimly. "Now we press the advantage." "Admiral," Reynolds said urgently, "one of the stealth ships has been boarded." Hayes's smile faded. "Which one?" "The Black Dagger." Reynolds' expression darkened. "Commander Reynolds to assault team. Report status." Static filled the channel. Then a sharp voice broke through. "This is Lieutenant Bonner. We've been compromised. Multiple hostiles on board. They're cutting through the bulkheads." Hayes's jaw tightened. "Reynolds, take a strike team and get them out of there." "Yes, Mom." Reynolds was already moving toward the exit. He grabbed his helmet from the wall, sealed it, and boarded the nearest dropship. Within seconds, his strike team was en route toward the Black Dagger. Inside the Black Dagger, chaos had erupted. Alien warriors, tall and skeletal with sharp, insect-like limbs, moved through the smoke-filled corridors. They hissed and screeched, plasma blades cutting through steel. Human soldiers returned fire, but they were outnumbered. Reynolds' dropship breached the hull, and the strike team moved fast. Plasma rifles flared, cutting down the alien intruders as Reynolds' squad pushed forward. Reynolds blasted through a reinforced door and found Bonner pinned beneath a collapsed bulkhead. "Reynolds." Bonner coughed, blood trickling down his face. "They're trying to reach the core." Reynolds knelt beside him. "Hold on. We'll get you out." Reynolds lifted the bulkhead with the help of another soldier. Bonner groaned in pain. Suddenly, one of the alien warriors lunged from the shadows. Its plasma blade slashed toward Reynolds' head. Bonner shoved him aside. The blade plunged into Bonner's chest. "No," Reynolds screamed. Bonner's eyes widened. He gasped, choking on blood. "Get them out of here." Reynolds caught him as he fell. His eyes burned with rage. He lowered Bonner's lifeless body to the ground, then stood, his plasma rifle trembling in his hands. "Seal the core," Reynolds barked. His squad moved quickly, locking down the ship's vital systems. Reynolds fired his rifle into the alien warrior's chest, blasting it apart in a burst of green blood and smoke. "Core secured," one of the soldiers reported. Reynolds knelt beside Bonner's body, his hand resting on his friend's shoulder. He closed his eyes. "You didn't have to." Bonner's lifeless face was frozen in a quiet smile. Reynolds stood, his eyes burning with anger. He tapped his communicator. "Reynolds to Valkyrie. Mission accomplished." On the Valkyrie's bridge, Hayes closed her eyes for a brief moment. She heard the pain in Reynolds' voice. Then her gaze sharpened as she turned toward the tactical display. "Enemy fleet is retreating." Reynolds' voice came through. "We've disrupted their chain of command." Hayes nodded. "Good work, Commander." The enemy fleet began to pull back, but Hayes knew this wasn't over. The Council would regroup. They would retaliate. Hayes' hand tightened into a fist. They had survived the first strike, but the real battle was still coming. The Terran fleet drifted in the dark void of space, battered but still intact. Debris from the first battle floated in twisted fragments, the shattered remains of destroyed alien vessels mixing with the wreckage of Earth's orbital platforms. The tactical map flickered on the bridge of the Valkyrie, showing the retreating enemy fleet forming up just beyond the edge of the system. They were regrouping, preparing for another strike. Admiral Hayes stood at the center of the bridge, her hands resting on the rail as she stared at the map. The Council forces were still out there, angry and humiliated. The damage inflicted on them was a setback, but not a defeat. They would return, and next time they wouldn't underestimate humanity. Hayes knew they couldn't afford to wait for the next attack. They had to hit back. Commander Reynolds entered the bridge, his face pale and tense. His uniform was stained with blood, and there was a hollow look in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He walked up to Hayes, standing rigidly at attention. "Bonner's body is being prepared for transport," he said quietly. His jaw tightened. "He saved my life." Hayes' gaze softened for a brief moment. He was a good man. Her eyes darkened as she turned back toward the tactical map. "And we will make sure his sacrifice wasn't in vain." Reynolds stepped closer. "You're planning a counterattack." "Yes." Hayes' eyes narrowed as the red enemy markers on the map pulsed threateningly. "We can't survive another direct assault. We need to take the fight to them. Strike them before they're ready." Reynolds hesitated. "We barely held them off the first time. That's why this time we hit them where it hurts," Hayes replied. "We cripple their command structure and take out their dreadnoughts. If we can't stop them through strength, we'll stop them through precision." Reynolds nodded slowly. "You want to target their command ships?" Hayes' lips curled into a grim smile. "Exactly." The bridge's main display shifted to show a detailed scan of the enemy formation. The Council's fleet was divided into 3 clusters, with their primary command vessel, a massive dreadnought named Vorith's Wrath, positioned at the rear. Its defensive shields were nearly impenetrable, but Hayes had a plan for that. "I want the stealth fleet to bypass their perimeter and hit Vorith's Wrath directly," Hayes said. "Once their command structure collapses, their fleet will lose coordination. That's when we strike." Reynolds' brow furrowed. "How do we get through their defenses?" "We use the Exodus maneuver." Reynolds' eyes widened. "That's a suicide run." "Not if we time it perfectly," Hayes replied. "We hit them hard and fast, and we don't give them time to react." Reynolds studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Understood. Prep the fleet," Hayes ordered. "We launch in 30 minutes." 30 minutes later, The Terran fleet moved into position. The stealth ships were already cloaked, sliding through the darkness undetected. The main attack force hovered just beyond sensor range, weapons armed and shields raised. Hayes stood on the bridge of the Valkyrie, watching the enemy formation through the reinforced viewport. The massive dreadnought loomed like a dark shadow in the distance, its hull bristling with plasma cannons and missile ports. "Captain Rourke," Hayes said over the comm channel. "Are you in position?" Rourke's voice crackled through. "Affirmative." Hayes's gaze sharpened. "Begin the maneuver." The stealth fleet emerged from the darkness, breaking cloak with surgical precision. Plasma torpedoes erupted from their hulls, streaking toward the enemy formation. The first volley struck the outer guard ships, blowing apart 2 cruisers and setting a third into a violent spin. The enemy's response was immediate. Defensive cannons flared to life, sending bursts of plasma into the void. "Stealth fleet taking fire," Reynolds shouted. Hayes's eyes glinted. "Phase 2, now." From behind the stealth fleet, the Terran battlecruisers roared into position. The Valkyrie surged forward, weapon systems locking onto the dreadnought. Streams of plasma fire erupted from its cannons, striking the enemy shields in blinding flashes of light. The dreadnought's defensive shields absorbed the attack, but the stealth fleet was already moving into position. Rourke's ship weaved through the chaos, slipping beneath the dreadnought's underbelly. "We're in position." Rourke's voice was strained over the channel. "Launching boarding team now." Small dropships fired from the stealth fleet and latched onto the dreadnought's hull. Explosions rocked the massive ship as the boarding teams cut through the hull. Inside the dreadnought, human soldiers stormed through smoke-filled corridors. Plasma rifles flashed in bursts of white light. Alien defenders scrambled to intercept them, but the humans moved with deadly precision. "Boarding team at the engine core," Rourke's voice came through. "Setting charges." On the Valkyrie's bridge, Hayes's gaze narrowed. "How long?" 60 seconds. The dreadnought's cannons fired in all directions, blasting Terran ships out of the sky. One of the stealth ships exploded in a burst of white fire. Another was struck along the hull and began to drift. "Hold the line," Hayes shouted. Suddenly, the dreadnought's shields began to flicker. The boarding team's sabotage was working. Reynolds clenched his fist. "They're exposed." "Fire EVE thing," Hayes shouted. The Terran fleet opened fire in unison. Plasma torpedoes and cannon fire hammered the dreadnought's weakened shields. Explosions tore across its hull, rupturing armor and exposing internal systems. The dreadnought's engines sputtered and died. "Charges are set," Rourke's voice shouted. "We're getting out." On the tactical map, small blips representing the boarding team's ships pulled away from the dreadnought. Seconds later, the entire center of the enemy ship erupted in a blinding chain of explosions. The dreadnought began to collapse in on itself, its massive hull folding inward as the core detonated. "Direct hit," Reynolds shouted. Hayes's eyes gleamed. "Finish the job." The Terran fleet surged forward. The remaining Council ships scrambled to retreat, but the Terran ships closed the distance with brutal efficiency. Plasma fire raked across the enemy vessels. 2 destroyers exploded in rapid succession. Another was cut in half by a volley of torpedoes. "Enemy fleet is breaking," Reynolds shouted. Hayes's gaze darkened. "Pursue them." "But, Admiral, they won't stop until we make them afraid of us," Hayes said coldly. The Terran ships chased the retreating enemy vessels into the void, cutting down any that lagged behind. The surviving Council ships finally warped out of the system, leaving behind a field of wreckage and fire. Hayes exhaled slowly. Her hand trembled against the rail as she watched the burning remains of the enemy fleet drift through space. Reynolds stepped beside her. His expression was haunted. "It's over." "For now," Hayes replied. Her gaze remained fixed on the burning wreckage. "But they'll be back." Reynolds' jaw tightened. "And we'll be ready." Hayes' eyes sharpened. "Yes, we will." Admiral Hayes sat alone in her quarters, the soft hum of the ship's engines vibrating through the metal walls. The battle had been won, but the cost was still fresh in her mind. The loss of Bonner, the destruction of half the stealth fleet, and the dozens of empty seats in the mess hall weighed on her shoulders like a crushing weight. Victory always demanded payment, but this one had come at a steep price. She took a deep breath, steeling herself as the door chimed. "Enter," she said. Commander Reynolds stepped in, his uniform crisp but his expression hard. He hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Admiral, we've received a communication from the Council." Hayes's eyes narrowed. "Already?" Reynolds nodded. "They're calling for a ceasefire." Hayes's lips curled in disbelief. "After they tried to wipe us off the map. They claim they want to open peace talks." Reynolds's tone was sharp with suspicion. Hayes leaned back, her gaze dark. "They're stalling, buying time to rebuild." "That's what I thought too." Reynolds handed her a data pad. "But there's something else." Hayes took the pad, her eyes scanning the encrypted transmission. The symbols of the Galactic Council flickered across the screen, followed by a set of coordinates. Hayes's brow furrowed. "This is a rendezvous point," she muttered. "Yes," Reynolds said. "They're asking for a direct meeting. Face to face. No weapons. No escorts." Hayes's jaw tightened. "And they think we're going to walk into that trap." Reynolds's expression darkened. "It gets worse. The request didn't come from the High Council. It came from the Terran ambassador." Hayes's head snapped up. "Ambassador Gray." Reynolds nodded. "He's alive. He claims he's been negotiating on our behalf this whole time." Hayes stood up, her mind racing. Gray had been presumed dead when the Council attacked the Terran embassy. His survival should have been impossible. And now he was not only alive, he was working with the enemy. "He's compromised," Hayes said coldly. Reynolds's jaw tightened. "That's what I thought. But the Council is using him as leverage. They're offering his release in exchange for a ceasefire." Hayes stared at the datapad. Her instincts screamed that something was wrong. The Council had shown no mercy before. Why would they suddenly offer peace now? And why use Gray as a bargaining chip? Unless... "They want us to lower our defenses," she muttered. "They want us vulnerable." Reynolds took a step closer. "We can't trust him." Hayes's gaze sharpened. "No, but we can use this." An hour later, the Valkyrie emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the rendezvous point. A single Council transport hovered in the darkness, unarmed and alone. Hayes stood on the bridge, flanked by Reynolds and Captain Rourke. "Scan the ship," Hayes ordered. "Scans show minimal life signs," Rourke reported. "One human. 2 Council guards." "They're making this too easy," Reynolds muttered. "Exactly," Hayes said. "They want us off balance." "Are we boarding?" Rourke asked. Hayes's gaze darkened. "No. Let them come to us." Minutes later, a small shuttle detached from the transport and glided toward the Valkyrie. Hayes and Reynolds stood in the hangar as the shuttle's ramp extended. 2 Council guards descended first, their tall, insectoid forms moving with cold precision. Between them, Ambassador Gray stepped into the light. Gray's face was gaunt, his once proud uniform hanging loose on his frame. His eyes, however, were sharp and calculating. He smiled faintly as he approached Hayes. "Admiral Hayes," Gray said smoothly, "it's good to see you again." Hayes's expression remained hard. "You're supposed to be dead." Gray's smile widened. "Things change. Why are you here?" "To secure peace," Gray said. His tone was casual, but his eyes gleamed with something dangerous. "The Council recognizes the strength of humanity. They see the futility of continued war. They're offering terms." Hayes stepped closer. "You expect me to believe that?" Gray's smile tightened. "You've proven humanity's strength. Now you need to show wisdom. The Council is offering a place at the table." "And what's the price?" Gray's gaze sharpened. "Disarmament. Terran fleets will be reduced by 70%. Military production will cease. and Terran space will be placed under Council protection. Reynolds's face twisted in anger. You want us to surrender? No, Gray said. We want you to survive. Hayes's eyes narrowed. And what do you get out of this? Gray's smile widened. My place on the Council. Reynolds stiffened. You sold us out. Gray's gaze darkened. I ensured humanity's survival. Hayes's eyes burned with cold fury. You betrayed us. The Council cannot be fought forever, Gray said. You may have won this battle, but the next one will come. And the one after that. They will keep coming until humanity is crushed beneath their heel. And you think surrender will save us? Hayes's voice was sharp. It will give us time, Gray said. Time to rebuild. Time to survive. Hayes stepped closer, her face inches from Gray's. You're wrong. Gray's eyes glinted. Am I? Without warning, Gray's hand moved toward his wrist. Hayes's reflexes kicked in instantly. Her hand shot out, grabbing his arm and twisting it painfully. A concealed device slipped from his sleeve. A small pulse emitter. A weapon. Guards, Reynolds shouted. The Council guards moved, but Hayes was faster. She pulled Gray's arm behind his back and shoved him to his knees. Reynolds fired his sidearm, dropping one guard instantly. Rourke's shot followed a second later, striking the other in the chest. Gray struggled in Hayes's grip. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, Hayes hissed. You were never here to negotiate. You were here to sabotage us. Gray's face twisted with rage. You can't win this war. We already have, Hayes said coldly. Reynolds picked up the pulse emitter. His eyes widened. Admiral, this is keyed to the Valkyrie's core systems. Hayes's blood ran cold. He was going to disable us. Alarms erupted across the ship. The tactical officer's voice rang over the comms. Admiral, Council fleet emerging from hyperspace. Hayes hauled Gray to his feet. You were stalling. Gray's eyes burned with triumph. Now you die. Hayes's fist connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling to the deck. Shields up, Hayes shouted. Battle stations. Reynolds's eyes were hard. Orders, Admiral. Hayes's gaze burned with icy determination. We're not running. Lock weapons on their lead ship. Gray coughed, blood staining his lips. They'll destroy you. Hayes smiled coldly. Let them try. The bridge of the Valkyrie was bathed in red light as the alarms blared across the ship. Admiral Hayes stood at the center of the chaos, her face carved from stone. The Council fleet had arrived, a wall of ships spreading across the black void of space. Massive dreadnoughts lined the front, their hulls glowing with charged plasma cannons. Behind them, sleek cruisers and fighter wings hovered, forming a lethal formation that screamed of precision and superiority. Council fleet strength confirmed. The tactical officer's voice trembled over the comms. 70 ships. Admiral. 2 dreadnoughts, 5 carriers, and a full complement of support vessels. Hayes's jaw tightened. Weapons status. Charged and ready. Reynolds stood beside her, his eyes hard. We're outnumbered 10-1. Hayes's gaze sharpened. Good. That means we won't miss. A crackling transmission cut through the noise. A deep mechanical voice filled the bridge. Terran vessel, this is Supreme Executor Wrinkle of the Galactic Council. Power down your weapons and prepare to surrender. Your defiance ends now. Hayes stepped forward, her eyes burning with cold fury. No. You have no chance of survival. You've said that before, Hayes replied. And yet here we are. There was a pause on the other end. Your arrogance will be your undoing. Hayes's lips curled. Maybe. But not today. The channel cut off. Hayes turned to Reynolds. Status on the fleet. Captain Rourke's squadron is in position, but they're badly outnumbered. Stealth division. Holding at the rear. Cloaking systems engage. Hayes's eyes narrowed. Time to fix those odds. The Council fleet began to advance, their dreadnoughts' plasma cannons humming with deadly energy. Dozens of fighter wings spilled from the carriers, swarming toward the Terran formation like a hive of angry wasps. The Valkyrie's targeting systems flared to life, painting the lead dreadnought with a lock. "Fire all forward batteries," Hayes shouted. The Valkyrie shuddered as its main cannons discharged. Bright red beams of energy lanced across the void, smashing into the dreadnought's shields. The enemy ship's hull shimmered under the impact, but the shields held. A return volley of plasma fire erupted from the Council fleet, arcing toward the Valkyrie. "Brace," Reynolds shouted. The ship rocked violently as the plasma bolts struck the forward shields. Sparks exploded from the consoles, and the lights flickered. Hayes gripped the railing as smoke filled the air. Shields holding at 60%. Return fire. The Valkyrie's railguns unleashed a barrage of hyper-accelerated rounds. The first few rounds detonated against the dreadnought's shields, but the next shots punched through. Explosions rippled across the enemy hull, sending debris spiraling into the void. A Council cruiser moved into position, targeting the Valkyrie's flank. "Enemy lock detected," the tactical officer shouted. "Stealth squadron, engage," Hayes commanded. The cloaked Terran ships shimmered into view, their weapon systems blazing to life. They streaked toward the cruiser, unloading missile volleys and beam fire into its hull. The cruiser's shields collapsed under the sudden assault, and a final missile from Rourke's ship tore through its engines. The ship erupted into a ball of flame. "Direct hit," Reynolds grinned. Hayes's eyes narrowed as another volley of plasma fire shot toward the Valkyrie. "Helm, hard to port." The ship banked sharply, the plasma bolts skimming just past the hull. Hayes turned toward the comms officer. "Patch me into the fleet." A moment later, the comms crackled to life. "This is Admiral Hayes. We hold this line. No retreat. No surrender." A chorus of affirmations filled the channel. Hayes's gaze sharpened. "Let's remind them why humanity survives." Suddenly, the main dreadnought's forward cannons began to glow ominously. A blinding blue light gathered at the tip of the cannon. "Admiral, enemy superweapon charging. Time to impact." 10 seconds. Hayes's mind raced. They wouldn't survive a direct hit. Her eyes flashed toward the stealth squadron's position. "Captain Rourke, concentrate fire on that cannon." "We're too far out," Rourke shouted back. "Then close the distance." There was a pause. Then Rourke's voice hardened. "Aye, Admiral." On the tactical display, Rourke's ship broke formation and accelerated toward the dreadnought. The rest of the squadron followed, their engines burning bright. The dreadnought's superweapon reached critical charge. 5 seconds. Rourke's squadron opened fire. A hail of missiles and beam fire rained down on the cannon's housing. Metal buckled and sparks erupted along the weapon's spine. But it wasn't enough. 3 seconds. Hayes's fists clenched. Suddenly, Rourke's ship broke formation entirely, accelerating toward the dreadnought's hull. "Rourke, what are you doing?" "No other way, Admiral." Rourke's voice was calm. "Rourke, abort. See you on the other side." Rourke's ship slammed into the dreadnought's cannon just as it fired. A massive shockwave erupted through the Council fleet, sending smaller ships spinning out of formation. The dreadnought's hull split open, secondary explosions tearing through its spine. A chain reaction ignited the reactor core. A blinding explosion consumed the dreadnought. The shockwave slammed into the Valkyrie, sending it spinning. Hayes was thrown against the console. The alarms screamed. Shields down to 20%. Hayes pulled herself to her feet. Fleet status. Rourke's squadron. Gone. Reynolds's voice was tight. Hayes's throat tightened. She closed her eyes for half a second, forcing herself to breathe. Rourke had known the cost, and he paid it without hesitation. "Admiral," Reynolds said suddenly, "Council ships are retreating." Hayes's eyes snapped toward the display. The surviving Council ships were breaking formation, accelerating away from the battlefield. "They're falling back." Hayes stepped toward the viewport, her eyes narrowing as the last council ship disappeared into the darkness. The wreckage of the dreadnought drifted silently across the stars. "It's over," Reynolds breathed. Hayes's gaze was hard. "Not yet." She turned toward the helm. "Set course for the council capital." Reynolds frowned. "Admiral, we're not waiting for them to regroup," Hayes said coldly. "We're taking the fight to them." Reynolds' eyes widened. Then he smiled. "Aye, Admiral." The Valkyrie's engines roared to life. The stars shifted as the ship turned toward the Council's homeworld. Hayes's gaze burned with quiet fury. The Council had drawn first blood. Now it was humanity's turn. The wreckage of the Council fleet drifted silently across the void, broken and burning. Jagged pieces of hull and twisted metal floated aimlessly, illuminated by the cold light of distant stars. The remains of the Council dreadnought, the very ship that had nearly annihilated the Terran fleet, hung in pieces, its core still leaking energy into the blackness of space. The battle was over, but the cost was written in the debris that surrounded the battlefield. On the bridge of the Valkyrie, Admiral Hayes stood motionless, her hands resting on the console in front of her. The faint hum of damaged systems filled the air. Sparks still danced along the ceiling where overloaded circuits had exploded during the last exchange of fire. Smoke drifted lazily through the air, giving the room a dim, haunted glow. "Damage report." Hayes's voice was quiet, but there was steel beneath it. Reynolds, standing at the tactical station, rubbed his face before responding. "We lost 6 capital ships, 47 smaller vessels damaged or destroyed. Casualties are estimated at—" He paused, his throat tightening. "Over 15,000. Hayes's eyes darkened. "And Works Squadron." Reynolds's jaw tightened. "Gone, Admiral." Hayes closed her eyes for a moment, the weight of that loss settling over her like a heavy cloak. Captain Work had known what he was doing. He had made a choice, a sacrifice, to save the fleet, to save humanity. Hayes forced herself to breathe, her gaze hardening as she opened her eyes. There would be time to grieve later, but not yet. Enemy status. "The surviving Council ships have retreated toward the inner colonies," Reynolds replied. "They're regrouping, but their command structure is shattered. They won't be mounting another assault anytime soon." Hayes's eyes narrowed. "That means they'll be fortifying their defenses." Reynolds hesitated. "Do you really think they'll risk another war?" Hayes's gaze was cold. "They don't have a choice. Not after this." A soft beep sounded from the communications console. The comms officer turned toward Hayes. "Admiral, incoming transmission. It's from the Council High Command." Hayes's lips curled in a grim smile. "Put it through." A holographic figure appeared in the air above the bridge. Supreme Executor Rinkel's face flickered into view, his reptilian features twisted with a mixture of anger and disbelief. His dark eyes glowed with simmering rage. "Terran Admiral." Rinkel's voice was tight. "What you have done today is nothing short of an act of terrorism." Hayes's expression didn't change. "I call it survival." "You destroyed a dreadnought of the Imperial fleet," Rinkel hissed. "Do you have any idea what that means?" "Yes." Hayes stepped forward, her eyes cold as steel. "It means you underestimated us." Rinkel's mouth twisted. "We offered you peace. You offered us slavery. There will be consequences for this." "Good," Hayes replied. "Bring it." Rinkel's eyes narrowed. "You believe you've won. You've gained nothing but ashes." "We've gained time," Hayes replied. "Time to prepare. Time to remind the galaxy that humanity will not be broken." Rinkel's expression twisted with fury. "This is not over." The transmission cut out. Silence settled over the bridge. Hayes exhaled slowly, her fists still clenched at her sides. Reynolds glanced at her. "You think he's bluffing?" "No," Hayes said softly. "But it doesn't matter." Reynolds frowned. "Why not?" "Because they thought we were weak." Hayes's eyes burned. "And now they know better." A quiet chime echoed from the tactical console. The officer's voice was hesitant. "Admiral, long-range sensors are picking up movement near the Council's core sectors. Looks like a tactical retreat. They're pulling back their outer colonies." Hayes's gaze sharpened. "They're regrouping." Reynolds's brow furrowed. "They're scared." "No," Hayes corrected. "They're adapting." A tense silence settled between them. Hayes's eyes drifted toward the viewport, where the wreckage of the Council fleet floated like silent ghosts. The cost of victory was written in those broken ships and the lives lost aboard them. Rourke, Bonner, thousands of others who would never return home. Reynolds's voice was quiet. "Was it worth it?" Hayes didn't answer right away. Her gaze remained fixed on the darkness beyond the viewport. "It has to be." A low hum shuddered through the ship as the engines powered down. Emergency lights flickered along the bulkheads, casting long shadows across the bridge. The crew's faces were etched with exhaustion and grief. Even victory tasted hollow when so much had been lost. "Admiral," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving a message from the Terran High Command." "Put it through." An older man's face appeared on the screen. Fleet Marshal O'Connor's eyes were dark and heavy. "Admiral Hayes." "Sir, we've been monitoring the battle. You've done the impossible today." "With respect, sir," Hayes's voice was steady. "It wasn't impossible. It was necessary." O'Connor's mouth tightened. "And the price?" "Too high," Hayes admitted. "But it was paid," O'Connor said quietly. "And now the Council knows humanity will not be pushed aside." "They'll be back," Hayes said. "Yes," O'Connor agreed. "And when they return?" "We'll be ready." Hayes's eyes flashed with determination. "Next time, we take the fight to them." O'Connor's gaze sharpened. "I'll see to it that you have the support you need." Hayes's jaw tightened. "We'll need it." The transmission ended. Hayes stood at the center of the bridge, surrounded by the hum of damaged systems and the quiet murmurs of her crew. Reynolds stepped toward her, his expression guarded. "So what now?" Hayes's gaze hardened as she turned toward the viewport. "We rebuild. We prepare." Her voice was steady. "And we make damn sure they never forget this day." Reynolds nodded. "And Rourke?" Hayes's throat tightened. He knew the cost. And he paid it. Hayes's eyes darkened. "Yes." Outside the viewport, the wreckage of the Council dreadnought drifted into the blackness, swallowed by the cold embrace of space. Hayes's reflection stared back at her from the glass, hard, unyielding. "They thought they could break us," Hayes whispered. "But they forgot one thing." Reynolds's brow lifted. "What's that?" Hayes's eyes burned with cold fire. "We're human." The Valkyrie's engines ignited, pushing the ship forward through the wreckage. Behind them, the battlefield was silent, empty save for the ghosts of fallen ships and the memories of those who had paid the ultimate price. Victory had come at a cost, but humanity had survived. And now they would rise.